Okay, I'm just going to finish on the first page and move to the second page as we start our video number 3, annotating exposure. I understand that several of you last week struggled a bit with how long the last annotation was. It was over an hour. It took about 5 hours for it to go to YouTube. So I'm breaking it into 3 this time. And if you note, the last line on the first page has an interesting structural quality. It has a hyphen. And it asks the question. So it is almost as if Owen is asking us part way through, nothing is happening, and then he uses this hyphen to emphasize that this is a separate thought. Because that's what a hyphen does. It's part of the same, but not quite. So it's a little bit of extra information. And using that hyphen takes us back to who has this power. Remember, life over death, who has that power? So far, nature is starting to have more of an impact than man. Okay? Where does God come in? Okay? Is he working with nature or is he working with man? We don't know. Okay? But bringing in "are we dying" as a separate idea is not like saying this is all means we are dying. It's almost like with a question mark. So that's like a separate structural idea using the question mark with the hyphen. You're bookending it as a separate idea. Okay, now we're moving from suffering and pain of the semantic field to death. And we're going to move over the page and start on our second set of annotations. And now we're looking for a potential semantic field of dying. You're going to get one straight away. Slowly, whoops, not even on the screen here. Slowly, our ghosts drag home, glimpsing the sunk fires glozed with crusted dark red jewels. Crickets jingle there. For hours, the innocent mice rejoice the house is theirs. Shutters and doors all closed. On us, the doors are closed. We turn back to our dying. This is a bit like having a set of hyphens with a new idea in here. And you can have the idea of dying, so let's follow it, because what is dying? What is being personified as dying? All right? So what is Owen saying about death, or who is dying? We've got ghosts dragging home. So if we're going to think about the semantic field of dying, it's a good idea to talk about ghosts. Let's write that we've got a semantic field of dying. Okay. Our ghosts are dragging home. Where is the really interesting words, though, to go with the idea of it being creepy and horrible? Because we've got other ideas to do with dying. Innocent mice. Okay? You've got crickets jingling, which is an interesting way. It's like a very positive, upbeat way of describing the way that crickets sound. So these are juxtaposition in a good way. You've got the bad idea of ghost juxtaposed with good ideas of home. All right, so what is dead to them then? It doesn't seem to be a person. It doesn't seem to be a literal thing. It seems to be an idea. So what idea has died to them? And we get the idea of from the third line, okay? And it's all structurally hinted, okay? So in the third line, there's a lot of punctuation. Sorry, in the fourth line, there was a lot of punctuation. Shutters and doors all closed. On us, the doors are closed. You get a sort of first this, then this. First this, then this. First this, then this, through this entire stanza. But it really focuses on the fourth line of the stanza. And it's very much, this is in my view, this is a symbolic closing, okay? They can't go home. Now, when you look for structure, you're also looking for things like repetition. So you get the idea of closed being repeated right before the big punctuation. So it's sort of closed, full stop, and then closed, full stop. It's very much the structure working. So this is a structure of repetition and then punctuation, pointing us to the idea of a symbolic closing, because we've closed it down, every close of a sentence, right? So the doors are closing. And when you talk about a door being closed, it's a symbolic closing, because doors close on a chapter of our life, don't they? Okay? So if I say, oh, that door's closed to me, it means I can no longer open the door and go through it. I'm moving on somewhere else in my life. It doesn't mean it's closed and I'm dead. So Owen could be symbolically showing this as a symbol through the structure and through the repetition of that structure, that their old lives are closed off to them. They're finished. They cannot do them anymore because they have been changed. Where do we get the idea that the men have been changed? Okay, well, we get the idea of change from the semantic field of dying. Okay, and I've on purpose put it here, so you really have to think about it. When you stop something and it dies, the idea dies, you start becoming something new. So the men have changed. They may have believed in the war before, but Owen questions whether they still do. The easiest thing when you look at poetry is to look at the structure, because it points the direction. You can't avoid it. So with this sort of structure here, you've got a call and response, call and response, call and response, call and response, except this call and response are all about the doors being closed, okay? So we have the bad, ghosts being dragged home, and the fires have been closed off. Okay? And you've got the good and the bad. Can't go home. Nope, it's theirs. Can't go home. Nope, it's theirs. Can't go home. Nope, it's theirs. So these ghosts are not real ghosts. They are ghosts. I suppose they are ghostly previous thoughts and lives. They can't go back to the way they used to be before they were in this trench freezing to death. They've gone through too much. Therefore, Owen is saying that the war has changed people for the worse. Moving on to the next refrain then, from the are we dying to the we turn back to our dying. The focus now for the rest of the poem seems to be on what they have lost. So we could say it's a semantic field of dying or loss. And really, it's a very sad ending. And the poem does take on, there is a progression with this poem. As you can see, it's in a very specific structure, but there is a very progressive poem. So we have in each stanza a 3-part progress. And then we have through the whole poem a progress. So let's have a quick note down here of the stanza progress. We open with the first line, so I'm putting a 1 there. it's very dramatic. It's very, very sensory. Okay? Then we have lines 2 to 4, which are emotive and sensory, but not as dramatic. That's our drama. Okay? We use a lot of this kind of thing. So we have adjectives, adverbs, alliteration. It's a very vocabulary, it's very structure, pointing to sensory feelings. Okay? And then we get our refrain, okay, which is a bit of an anticlimax, because it's usually a question. And this follows the same throughout the poem. So the poem itself opens on a very dramatic start. If you can remember, we talk about the intertextual link with Keats and about our brains aching and everything is terrible, nature is brutal. We go through this amazing amounts of adjectives, alliteration, okay, in these alliterative middle stanzas. So we're thinking that as we move toward the last few, we're going to be going toward an anticlimax. And we're focusing on loss. I want to show you what the final focus of the poem is. All right? Let's start on the penultimate stanza. Since we believe not otherwise, can kind fires burn? Now ever sun's smile true on child or field or fruit. For God's invincible spring our love is made afraid. Therefore not loath, we lie out here. Therefore we're born. For love of God seems dying. This is the hardest stanza. Okay? So, let's look at this. I'll try and make it easier for you. I'm going to focus us on this. I know that it's toward the end, but everything in this stanza is pointing us toward why they were born. And the big dramatic idea in the beginning is this. It's almost a question, but not quite. Do they believe? Okay? As a question, the question is, do they believe? Because when they talk about that feeling of burning and kind, they're talking about, do they believe that this is why they were born? To fight in this war. There was a lot of questioning here. Is this a question about home? We've got true on child, field, or fruit. So we've got, is it questioning nature? Does it work in nature? What about, for God's invisible spring our love is made afraid? Purpose of life. This is hard because you have to read in, you have to infer that they're questions before you can analyze it. But the question is, we believe not otherwise, therefore were we born. So is this their ultimate purpose in life, really? Freeze to death, fighting this war. Okay, and that's very much a question to go along with your argument, isn't it? And you can say that the poem leads us to consider that toward the end. Is there going to be a solution here? Well, he hasn't come up with one in the second to the last stanza. he's just come up with a lot more questions. And with the semantic field of loss and dying, what are we losing? They're lying out here. What are they losing? This is a biblical allusion. So we talked about allusion being really important as part of our SOAP aims. This is a biblical allusion. And as a biblical allusion, it's the purpose of living was in fact to die. And so it's how do you die? Is that the question? The reason for being born is to die. Okay? And they link it very nicely here to the love of God. And this can be taken in two ways to prove our point. So we can either, he said it very, very ambiguously. Is it that men have stopped loving God? Or is it the other way around? Is it that God stopped loving men? Now for Owen, who was going to be a priest, this is a serious question. So, is this their ultimate purpose in life? Well, that goes back to this question, do we believe that our ultimate purpose in life is to do God's will? Well, Owen clearly did, from leaving the church even because he didn't think it was doing enough to look after people. There is a lot of things implied into the dying. You see, it's not dead, so it's not final yet. It's still a process. And you have, the love of God seems dying. We're still in the process of doing that. Not finished. So is the love of God, has God stopped, finished loving his people? No. He's in the process of doing it potentially, shown through nature being so brutal. And it really gets the Owen to make you question as the reader, is this the soldier's purpose in life? And he references God a lot in this, because this is important as a question, going back to his beliefs that God is in charge of the universe. All right? And then we will do the last stanza. Tonight, this frost will fasten on this mud and us, shriveling many hands and puckering foreheads crisp. The burying party, picks and shovels and shaking grasp, pause over half-known faces. All their eyes are ice, but nothing happens. He leaves us on a cliffhanger. This is an anticlimax. Nothing has changed. Okay? Nothing has changed. It is cyclical. Begins back where it started. Okay? So war is futile. There's no point to it. It never finishes. So he has left us a little bit on an anticlimax. Okay? A little bit. So the ending of the poem is very much that it's been cyclical. We are back where we started, therefore, and the question is unanswered. Is it a political commentary exposing the evilness of the governments in their plot to get us to fight? Or is it a literal quest to try and get proper equipment for the soldiers out in the field? What does he want to happen next? I mean, nothing has happened. So what does he want to happen? So it's an anticlimax. What does he want to happen? Could it be a battle? as they are dying anyway. So would he prefer a battle to the incessant cold? Okay. Would he prefer a solution to the war and therefore peace, one could argue, like the war photographer? Or could he want release from war through death? Now this is you being critical, because you could pick one and then say these are also possibilities, but this is the best one. I would argue the second one, because it's much easier to link that to other poems. And I would say, but you could also read that, and you could also read that. However, my argument is based on this because of what I'm about to say next. Okay, so then I find my evidence to prove that. Okay? We've got a beautiful metaphor about half-known faces. The dead bodies, or the live ones that might be dead, are they half-known because they are so new? Or are they half-known, okay, because they are trying to avoid getting to know? Or are they half known because they are so disfigured by death? It's always good to have a possibility of three interpretations. And then there's the personification of all their eyes are ice. Now you could say they're ice. Whose eyes? Who is there? Is it the burying party? Because they are so unemotional? Or is it the dead men? Okay, so I would suggest that they are emotionless, okay, and we could link that to the idea from War Photographer of his impassively. Remember what in the last word? Last line where he impassively, or last two lines, where he's impassively looking out the window going to his next destination. These men are impassively, simile like ice, or a metaphor, sorry, they are ice. Okay? Right, so let's have a look at the focus on death then, because of the semantic field. We've got a structural focus now. Obviously, you're not going to have time to talk about this in an essay, so I'm mostly focusing on the essay-worthy ones, but you've got a structural focusing on the semantic field of death again, with the structure pointing to the semantic field words, okay? And you've also got the idea that it's tonight. That's very sensory, isn't it? It's now. There's immediacy. It is happening, okay? It's ongoing. Right, so this guy is in the middle of it. Tonight this is going to happen, and tomorrow and the next day. We've now annotated the poem. We've started to connect it already to ideas from another poem. We've got at the end an attack on faith, which I haven't said yet, so I better say that. We've got an attack on faith. Is God with us or against us? Is it that God doesn't care anymore? Is it that people don't care anymore about God? And therefore, if they just ask for help, he'll give it to them. Owen, I think, is trying to leave that open for people because he was very non-judgmental about the people he was with. He was very, very judgmental and about the people running the war in the government. Okay? So you can get an idea that the progress of the poem, so this is very much to do with the cyclical structure that we were talking about, and this is the form, goes from identities destroyed by the war as no longer any empathy for the dead. These men are totally impassive. They cannot feel emotion anymore because they're trying not to get to know people. They are all dying. So it's gone to the identities are being destroyed by the war. Massive change, just like in War Photographer, where his previous identity was destroyed. His home problems now no longer seem that big a deal. They can be fixed by some sunshine. The real life that he's living is in other war-stricken countries. Have we gone to that? We have to accept that there is no justification for this war. This war being World War I. Therefore, the suffering that they're all undergoing is completely futile. And finally, they retreat into their memories of home. And we've got things where they talk about different parts of the things they remember from their home, because I've got my arrows going the wrong way. Whoops, I knew this wasn't right. So the poem ends here. Mrs. Murta is tired today. So we start at being under attack by the weather, and then we move to, is it really weather that is hurting them? Then we start reflecting on it, their memories of home. Then they accept there's no justification for the war when we go into the second to the last stanza, where we say God is not with us. And then we end up that they cannot feel empathy for the war. All their eyes are ice. And at the end, the refrain, but nothing happens. Therefore, they are led to the conclusion. Oops, I can't spell. The conclusion, which is nothing is likely to change. So the exposure is just of that. The fact that this is suffering is happening and nobody's doing anything about it. Right, I hope you've enjoyed the annotation. Take a deep breath and do the quiz for the rest of today's work, and then you'll be lucky you've got a day off on Friday. All right, thank you very much, everyone.